In this episode, we're going to be going over the 3D Dungeon flooring, and I put my grid up on this piece, and I screwed it up a little bit. I figured my T-square was like 2 inches wide, so I was like, oh, well, I'll just jump over and I won't measure anything out, and I ended up getting way off, so I had to redo it a little bit, just on this one side. About this material, this is a pine piece of plywood, and it is 3/4 of an inch thick by 24 inches by 48 inches, and I did not have to cut this. This piece was perfectly square, so when I put my T-square on it, my grids came out perfect when I measured them, right? So when you go to pick this out, make sure to try to find one with as few knot holes in it as possible. There's like some knot holes right here, but the rest of this is very clean. And on this side, it's like completely perfect. Now this piece of pine plywood here cost me $10, and if you wanted to go up to the really nice furniture grade wood, it was going to be like $16 to $25 for the exact same dimensions, and even a little thinner in some instances. So I decided to go for the cheap one, even though this is really nice. I mean, I had to dig and dig and dig to get this one, but I did get this piece, and it has very few imperfections. We're gonna texturize this and stuff anyway. So this would be the one. I was gonna choose a nicer one, but I figured I'd save myself like over 50% of the cost in getting this. So we have this all gridded up with our pencil, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut in the grid with my circular saw. Now, if you have a nice table saw, you can do this with a table saw, and if you got a jig and all that stuff, and this will come out perfect. But most people don't have a table saw like laying around in their back pocket, so I'm going to use a regular circular skill saw. Another power tool we're going to need for the walls is we're going to need a jigsaw, or if you have one, you can use a bandsaw. A bandsaw is preferable, but I'm going to show you how you can rig up your jigsaw to where it'll work just as well as a bandsaw. So with that, I'm going to move outside and start working on cutting my grid. I've got my board set out, and I've got my grid put on, and I've got it on a sawhorse, and I have my circular saw, and I have the depth gauge set almost all the way at maximum, and I just want 1/8 of an inch showing on my saw blade. Now this is a plywood saw blade, and I'm going to test it on a scrap piece of wood before I actually dig into my good piece of wood here to make sure it's at the right depth I want. I want just a very, very small, just so I can see the grid, and so that it's going to look like stone tiles. So I'm going to put my safety gear on and check my depth. And that is just about perfect. Woo. Right down the middle. So this is going to be a pretty boring and tedious part of this build. So I'm going to show a little bit, but you kind of get the picture. It's like cut, rinse, repeat. So let's get started here. Well, that's fucked up. I've got my first side gridded up here, and number one thing is since this is such a shallow cut, at first I was trying to use the guides on the saw but they were way off, and I ended up messing a couple pieces up. We're going to fix that in the next step. But watch the blade on the saw instead of you trying to use the guides, and make sure to just knock off that pencil mark on your board instead. It still came out pretty good, except for right here where the very first couple cuts, and I didn't realize what was going on until it was too late, and I had to redo some lines, but we'll fix it. Very, very shallow, like an eighth of a... Shit, what the fuck was that? It's a cockroach. On it. Got stuff crawling up my pants.